People keep calling it a community, like it's accredited, and we all have certificate of like accreditation. Oh, I'm a ufologist.
Right.
We're all just we have a common interest in something that we can have a dialogue about.
Yeah.
Move on to something else until more comes along.
I like it.
There are so many people on X and in other aspects of studying the phenomenon that are expending unnecessary amounts of energy, cutting people down, cutting down the investigations of others.
Yes.
And it going right to the jugular, which is their character. I remember John Ramirez telling me after he saw my presentation in San Francisco about the Burisch stuff. He said, it's my opinion that the stuff you're talking about, they don't want talked about. What are we going to do?
Yeah.
I mean, I had a journalist who believes this wholeheartedly saying, Brian, within the next year, you need to get out of California. So when I heard of that article and how absolutely poorly investigated it was, but there was still an intention, put it out there, that there's nothing to the subject, and all these people are just nut jobs. To me, I go, that's that faction still trying to operate and try to put this thing down. It is both, Gabriel, it's both a statement about the effectiveness of somebody to make a story go dark and the gullibility of ufology to allow that to happen.
Welcome back to the Gabriel Speaks Show podcast, everyone. I am so glad you're here. I am so pumped for this episode. I was able to communicate with one Brian Jackson, who is the leading researcher of the Dan Burisch story. You can go to the burisharchive.com. It is the most comprehensive explanation of the Dan Burisch story and the multiple timelines that come along with it. If you are not familiar with the Dan Burisch story, please go to burisharchive.com and reference it as you listen to this podcast. Brian and I get a little more into the depths of the research, how that research was performed, and kind of his general experience in ufology and how he's seen things evolve over the years. I hope you all enjoy watching this podcast as much as I enjoy doing it. Brian Jackson is a pleasure to have on, and we hope to have him back. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more updates and news like this. Hey everyone, welcome to the Gabriel Speaks podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I am so excited. I get to have on a guest today that I have been referring to their research, their website, just in general, the way they approach ufology. Brian Jackson is with us today. He's been in this field for 37 years. He has been researching UFOs and UAPs. Really started in the early days of the internet. He worked on platforms like Fido.net, Paranet, Transcendental Communications, where he co-administered bulletin boards. So then the research wasn't easy like it is for us YouTubers today, where we could just watch a few YouTube videos, hop on a few CIA FOIA websites and do the research. Back then, you had to actually, boots on the ground. You had to go to the libraries. You had to go to these conferences. You had to go talk to these people on the phone, actual, work. So over the decades, Brian has worked with multiple people in the field. Another reason I'm just so excited and so happy to have him on. He's really been specialized on the Dan Burisch story. So if you go to burisharchive.com, which is a website I find myself referencing, to friends all the time and X Spaces all the time. If you want to know anything about the Dan Burisch story, it is, in my opinion, the most complete picture of the story. It's laid out in ways that are easy to understand because it is a very complicated story. When you start talking about timelines and time travel and agendas and humans and all this kinds of crazy stuff. So I found it's a really great resource to help put everything kind of into perspective. It lays it all out for you. And I'm just honored. He's a graduate of Art College for Design in Pasadena, California. And he's currently in the LA area, and he has decided to share a little time with me today. So Brian, thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, Gabriel. Great to be here and super happy to be part of your show today.
Thank you. And I have, I have done a few videos on Dan Burisch, and if you don't know the Dan Burisch story, if you're new to the Dan Burisch story, if you came across this video wondering what Dan Burisch is, again, I highly, highly recommend you go to Brian's website. It's going to be laid all out, and you can find multiple videos, Brian, on other shows, talking with other hosts and laying out his presentation. He has his own, the burisharchive.net. You've got the YouTube videos that kind of explain your presentation. So the story's out there, and I think, if you want to know more, you can find out. And I didn't want to have you on to, talk and repeat what because you've had to kind of reshare the story with people, this next generation, as we're coming up, they kind of pissed on Dan Burisch, and the community kind of abandoned him. And he kind of went back to his own thing. And we kind of have this new generation coming up, and you're starting to hear things like Looking Glass or, Project Lotus. And they're saying, what is that? And they don't know where it came from. And I'm finding myself having to go, oh, Dan Burisch, you don't know this story? And so there's this new generation that's seeing this, and they're not as soiled on the idea. It seemed like back then, once George Knapp kind of shit on it, the community was, oh, well, George Knapp crapped on it. That was it. But I think now people are realizing, especially with George Knapp himself out there saying, hey, I've made mistakes. We all make mistakes. I think people are a little more open to the possibilities that this could have actually happened. What's your take on that?
Yeah, you're right. And in large part, there is a whole new generation of people that were completely unaware that this transpired literally from around the year 2002 to 2007, I say. That's like the golden era of the Dan Burisch story. George has never walked back his stance on it, even as of recently a Contact in the Desert, he's dug his heels in.
I heard the audio.
Yeah, fascinating, because in his article that he wrote that seemed to neutralize a significant part of ufology, he didn't touch on so many pieces of material and stuff that was still unfolding after the article came out that I thought this needs to be dusted off and relooked at. And the manner by which I came into this story, that is the reason I'm even on a show like yours today, was just that I stumbled across it long after it went dark. And I can get into that in a moment if you'd like.
I'd love to hear it, yeah.
So, yes, I've been into the subject since around 1989, when Bob Lazar's story was unfolding. I took great interest in that story, and I was super interested in the government aerospace connection to the phenomenon. And studied quite a number of, stories that revolved around military installations, black programs, things like that. And I befriended a researcher that was really on the cutting edge of that at the time. His name is Bill Hamilton. Later, you will find out he was the principal investigator of the Dan Burisch story.
Legend.
But around the year 2000, I had my first child, and then my next child two years after. And my wife and I spent a lot of our time raising them. And I was only ancillarily aware of this J-Rod story, but I didn't have time to get into it.
Yeah.
So I did attend some conferences, and in around the year 2000, around the year 2000, I think it was, Bill Hamilton was speaking in Los Angeles. He's a good friend of mine. We befriended each other, been to his house with his wife, had dinners. We were really close, and I really, really appreciated his approach to investigation. And he was pretty much considered to everybody in the community back then as one of the best investigators of the time.
Fantastic.
And so I attended his lecture in 2000. He talked about this brand new case he's working on about this scientist, and that there was a document that was released called the Q94-109A document circulating on the internet, and that it documents and chronicles the study of this species. And he was very excited by it. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. I can't wait to find out more. Well, time goes on, things happen, and I still didn't get much into the story, and it kind of came and went. Now let's fast forward. I know this is a significant amount of time, but it's not important right now. But around the year 2012, 2013, I started looking into that story. And my first foray into it revealed the connection it had to Bill Uhouse, the Los Alamos National Labs engineer, who was supposedly working with a J-Rod for back engineering technology. I'm like, that's interesting. What is this J-Rod? And through a little more search, I find this story of this one that Dan Burisch was associated with. And I look and look and look, and I find actually a whole treasure trove of information on this case. Dozens of videos, lots of articles, lots of blog posts, lots of debate. Some of the best researchers were investigating him. And it was one video, the 2002 video interview of him, which took place at Las Vegas Library, actually. The very first interview of Dan. And in the background, I hear Bill Hamilton's voice asking Dan questions. Like,
Yes.
this is that case.
Yes.
And then I'm like, okay, I'm into this full force now. So that's
I
how
can only imagine.
yeah, I'm like, if Bill was involved in this, there was going to be a significant amount of really good investigation.
Right.
And here I am now in 2013 looking at this going, what happened to this story? This is like the biggest story I've ever heard. It is both, Gabriel, it's both a statement about the effectiveness of somebody to make a story go dark and the gullibility of ufology to allow that to happen. Because when you go and reinvestigate this case and look at all the details that associate and support what Dan was claiming, you come away with the same feeling as I did. Like, why did this go dark? How is this not the very number one story way above Bob Lazar's?
Right.
We worked at the same facility. So that's how I got into it. And I have not been looking back. And just even within the past few years, anecdotally, there's been some other names coming out that are supporting some of the claims, not the least of which is Matthew Brown in his cryptic ex post. I want to say now it's about 3 weeks ago. He talked about this technology he's aware of that looks into our future.
Yes.
And people like Harold Malmgren, who was interviewed on Jesse Michael's show, and Harold is talking about Majestic and these deep black programs. And there was another Reddit leaker who talked about a program where Mike McConnell, is like the gatekeeper. That's exactly what Dan had said back
MJ1. Isn't he the MJ1?
Yeah, he was.
According to Dan, yeah.
Yes, and kind of a godfather to Dan himself, which afforded Dan some great, which afforded Dan to have some better access to the program because Mike was the one running Majestic at the time.
And I mean, in my opinion, if you believe the story, probably the reason he's still alive is that kind of bond that he had with that organization, especially if you look at all the scientists that have died that have been a part of that program ever since.
Yeah. So so I don't know now at this point, Gabriel, how much you feel like you need to bring people up to speed about what this story is. I know we're talking about it. I don't know how many of your
that's the thing. So I have tried to tell this story, right? And I think there's a couple videos I've talked about it, and I think the last video I did about it, what I actually did was kind of tied him in with some of the stuff that Michael Masters has been saying lately. Have you read any or seen any of his stuff lately?
I have, and he as far as I'm aware, Michael has a kind of view of a future human lineage, time travel, which is very critical to understanding and accepting the claims of Dan Burisch.
Right. And there's even, he's on, I forget whose show it was, but, he even mentions Dan Burisch. And, and he comes away with, I think same feeling a lot of people that watch some of his videos come away with is like, I don't think this guy's lying. I mean, like, and I've said this before, like my wife, has worked at the DA's office, is heavily involved in body language, stuff like that. And, I had her watch one of his videos with me because I just couldn't make heads or tails of it. I was like, is this guy spinning a web or is this guy is telling the truth? And she watched a good half hour, 40 minutes of it. And she was like, he's telling the truth. He's telling the truth. He knows. Either way, he believes it. But to me, that means a lot. I'm like, okay. So to me, I mean, that really fueled my, like, I want to know more. I want to find out more. And when I heard Michael Masters talking, I was like, oh my God, that's like very similar to what Dan was saying. Like if we become these travelers that travel far off into space and, cover all this space, we know space equals time and this and that. And so we know that if we want to send Billy out on a mission to, wherever, reticuli, if we want him to come back and it's not 500 years later and everybody's died, we're going to have to figure out some kind of way to time travel. And that gets into this Dan story. And then, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't Schallenberger reference the Dan story at the UAP hearings?
Yes. Well, not formally in session, but in his provided documentation that went into record, along with Immaculate Constellation, which is what he was there to speak about. He included Dan's case and his claims, as well as another gentleman, his name's escaping me right now, who also in record claimed that Dan's case was legitimate. So what that means, though, when you really internalize all of the claims, it is the ultimate dot connector to me. There's so many holes that it fills when trying to understand this subject, and also it involves a tremendous amount of complexity, because you're being asked to understand technologies and concepts that are far beyond what we know at the moment, but they're not. If we're to just play in the sandbox of possibilities and we think of ourselves 52,000 years into the future, maybe we did figure out time travel. Right now, maybe that's not possible. But let's say we did. And let's say that the evolution of our human species presents 52,000 years from now a number of genetic issues. And that with the ability of time travel, we can come back here and try to fix them.
Right.
Which then gets into genetics and our DNA, and the fact that there would be the possibility that they're coming back here to try to fix this issue that they're experiencing in the future, to try to ameliorate this. But it involves agreements with the U.S. And other countries that we need to abduct, because we need to do the genetic manipulation that's going to affect our species in the future. It's not going to be pretty. And they tried to have agreements. Some of those got kind of bastardized, and
I think that also adds to some of the confusion in the story, right? Is like, you have to understand with this story, if you're accepting this story at face value, then we know that they might be future humans, but they're still humans. And so they're going to suffer from the same kind of temptations that we all do. So when they get offered the chance to travel through time, as he says, some of them didn't exactly do the right thing. Some of them, went back and lived a high life back in the day like gods, and did all this stuff because ultimately they're man. And, some are going to have good agendas, some are going to have their own agendas, and so on and so forth.
And as it relates to Dan himself as an individual that's caught in the middle of what we're talking about today, he was a prodigy level microbiologist. And at the earliest level, at the earliest ages, he showed an acuity in the sciences that was way beyond his years. Very much like Harold Malgrum, by the way. He talks about in his teen years, he knew stuff about quantum physics and things that was way beyond his years, and he was being monitored by Majestic.
Fascinating.
Now, Dan was being monitored by Majestic as well from an early age, and especially when he became the youngest member of the Los Angeles Microscopical Society. And this would have been probably when he was about 14. So this would have been the early 70s. And he started to be monitored. Now, this idea of monitoring by the U.S. military-industrial complex, even today, is not unusual. They fund GATE and STEM programs to monitor people with exceptional abilities, and even have the capability of tapping them to roll them into a program if they see their acuity in a number of areas as being an advantage to their needs.
Yeah, so we're hearing a lot about that now, about these folks that went through that when they were younger and completely forgot about it and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, so many people talk about, I remember my son was taken sometimes when he was going to school to this special building. He'd be tested on these abilities.
Yeah.
That's all starting to come out now. And some of that was not necessarily nefarious.
Yeah.
But there was a monitoring of a lot of children.
Yeah.
It might still be going on today.
I wish I could give it credit. I don't know what show it was. I was scrolling through, I think it was X, and a video came up, and it was a short of a podcast where a guy was literally like, his mind was exploding because as this girl was explaining what she went through, he was remembering these things, and he was like, "Oh my God, like I did that." And it is quite amazing. You couple that with some of the MK Ultra stuff, and that CIA is involved in this field, and it gets kind of, oh boy, it's scary. To me anyway, it gets a little scary.
It is. It's a little disconcerting. It happened to another gentleman who wrote a book. His name's Dan Sherman. Dan Sherman's story is very much like Dan Burisch's, in that Dan was monitored from an early age. He was pulled out of school, taken in a van. He was taken with other school kids, and their psi abilities were being worked on. And it would eventually roll him into a program where he was monitoring the linguistic capabilities the aliens have to have important dialogue with our government as it relates to the monitoring of the abductions that they're carrying out, and letting them know, each person, what their pain threshold is, and all this stuff. It gets really crazy.
Yeah.
Dan Sherman's story is very interesting as well then. But Burisch eventually gets rolled into a program, and through lots and lots and lots of testing, eventually he's rolled into an upper level program called Aquarius, where he eventually is presented to work with a living entity that we're keeping. I wouldn't use the word captive in a very loose sense, because he was being held in a facility, the same S4 facility that Bob was working at, Bob Lazar, but on a level deeper where Bob never had access. And apparently the being was part of an exchange program and knew that he was participating, again, in a part of this program that was to help understand the delineation of their genetics going forward, that they're trying to work on, and they're asking our help. Now, that very statement, I say, asking our help, draws into a very logical question. Why, if they're so advanced, are they asking us to help them?
It's a great question.
Very reasonable question. Extremely reasonable. Well, this gets into the evolutionary arc of the human species. Eventually reveals acceleration and deceleration of some aspects of our humanity. Our scientific acuity accelerates. Our spiritual and biological side decelerates. And supposedly what I mean by that is that apparently they lose all of the understanding spiritually and genetically about their makeup.
Wow.
And that's a side of them. There's the J-Rod species. It's not a name of an alien. It's the name of a species.
Right.
The J-Rod species was one that had a very, very traumatizing evolutionary arc. They had to go underground when a major catastrophe was to happen here post-2012 here on Earth for thousands of years. And then they go off planet and live at another planet for thousands of years. And in the process, their evolutionary makeup accelerates and decelerates in some areas. And part of their understanding of their genetic code and all that apparently is not as good as we are today. And so some of what they're doing now is coming back to us today to say, look, people like this scientist, we could use his help because we lost our ability to understand what's happening with our genetics. Ask us about flying saucers and physics. We got that down.
Right.
We lost all ability for our spiritual understanding about our history and all these other aspects. So it wasn't that they don't understand. It's not like just because they're advanced, they must know everything about everything. No, they've lost that.
Yeah. And that's one thing that doesn't get talked about a lot in this story. Dan Burisch was a very spiritual guy. Very, very strong believer in God, very strong believer in the power of God.
Seminary.
Yeah. So I think that says a lot. And so with that being said, and I'm going to put up the chart from your Burisch archive that kind of shows the evolution and the split and everything.
Yeah, great.
But at that point, so they go underground, which also is quite terrifying because now we're hearing all these $21 trillion underground caverns. Apparently, the government's been building everywhere. So it's like, oh my God, it's here we go. It's just one more thing that's like, Dan told us about this 20 years ago, and
nobody believed it because they had every right to not believe it. This wasn't be talking about ufology.
Yeah.
That would be nut jobs who are talking about underground cities.
Conspiracy theorists,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. And now we're finding, oh no, this is this is a Bush White House advisor that's saying this.
Right.
Like, she was in charge of trillions of dollars. I don't know if you can put her on a conspiracy theorist list. I mean, she was concerned enough to come out on a podcast or write a book about it and everything else. And it's not just her. There's other people saying it too with the underground bases. And so the underground bases, they go underground. Now there's that other part, right? The Orions.
Yes.
That
they go off planet immediately.
Right. Somehow, either right before the incident or right after, whatever the incident is, they're able to get off planet. They find peace in the Orion Nebula, is it?
They first go to the moon and then to Mars and then eventually to the Orion constellation.
Okay.
So their evolutionary arc, part of it environmentally different than the J-Rods, who are underground, and their physiology changed because they're in an environment very different than the Orions. The Orions grew to be these tall, intelligent, spiritually advanced, by the way, beings that we sometimes today refer to them as the Nordics, very highly advanced in every sense. And they do have a morality and spirituality that is sympathetic to us.
Right.
Yeah.
And when Dan talks about restoring the resonance, the way I took it, he's basically talking about trying to kind of combine those two sides back together. That kind of separated from spirituality side with the full spirituality, that Orion and the reticuli trying to bring that back together. Is that right?
Essentially, that catastrophe that happens here was the beginning of that split in the human genome.
Right.
So, and there is a reforming of them, supposedly 52,000 years at least then. And they're both visiting us now. And so the Orions are the ones that supposedly met with Eisenhower in 54 at Air Force Base out here. That's now Edwards.
Yes. Yeah.
And they supplied him with the Orion Cube, which would end up being a device very significant in our history, where we're able to use this cube to see future events, somewhat like the Looking Glass. But the Looking Glass was a device that we built from technology and from an understanding of their help with us to understand how to make this device. But it was not a very dependable piece of technology. It had its good side and it had its bad side. The bad side was in its operation, it opened up wormholes, which were very, very dangerous to its operation.
Right. And I think, didn't Dan mention that your perception could also influence kind of what you would see in the future, right?
Yeah, apparently, by virtue of the idea of multiple timelines, our future is not a direct single timeline to where we are now, just looking into the future. If we look into our future by virtue of these devices, the result is we do have the ability to nudge future events to keep whatever happened, this catastrophe, whatever, to be bypassed. Apparently that seemed to have happened because post-2012, we seem to be now on a different timeline. 2012 was supposed to be a very critical time where there was going to be a crossing of paths, where we could end up going the dark direction where the catastrophe happens, or we could go to a different direction.
Yes. Now here's
a direction I don't have information on.
I was going to say, here's the worry, right? Is like in the direction that Dan says they chose, Hillary won the presidential race.
Right.
That didn't happen. So what timeline are we in now?
And I this is where I don't have all the answers. I'm still trying to understand. I know that this all unfolded, these theories about this future unfolded in 2007. Dan and a team of other people were rolled back into the Majestic program, where for 6 months in 2007, from the summer to late fall, December, he was cut off from all friends and family. And he was part of this program that was to look at all future possible scenarios. And after spending 6 months with this team, they agreed timeline 1, variation 83, which foretold a future. Now, again, this is 2007, a future where Hillary Clinton would become president. There would be a major stock market crash. There'd be a nuclear war. And there would then be a cataclysm that was based on our place in the geometry of where we are in our space. where we come into contact with a lot of various kind of wormholes that
Yes.
causes pole shifts and things. Well, that sounds like a complete disaster. You know what? You go back and look at what the kids from the Ariel school were seeing. For those who are familiar with that case in Zimbabwe, those
Yes.
school children were confronted with this being, this crash or this landing, and some of them had this telepathic, download. And you're saying, "Hey, kids, in your future, there's going to be a major catastrophe. This is how bad it's going to be." And they flooded them with these images of people dying and the earth like going into craziness. And it makes you think about that happening post 2012.
Yeah.
It's
Well, and
now.
you look at the state of things, and oh boy,
That's why
tensions are high.
If I could talk to Dan again, I'd say, Dan, what was fallback number 2?
Please, Dan. Please, Dan. Please. Like,
what was that like?
You mentioned you were able to kind of get through the maze of gatekeepers and with your persistence and just your stick-to-itiveness, were able to finally get in touch with Dan, which was probably just a huge breakthrough moment. I know for me, I would have just been smiling ear to ear. Like, I would have been so ecstatic to just finally talk to this guy. What was that like?
Well, leading up to that, there was a forum. This adds to the mystery surrounding Dan.
Right? There's so much.
Right? So you're never going to convince me he's not. He's an enigma, and he would admit it. He knows there's a lot to have to take in. But there was this public-facing forum, very archaic platform in style, that was like an old bulletin board. And I discovered it.
The Golden Thread?
The Golden Thread.
Okay, yeah.
Not up anymore.
Yeah.
And I found it, and I saw all this dialogue going on in it, where it seemed to be very codified militaristic operational dialogue.
Very weird.
And I'm not in the military, but to me it looked like, the QAnon stuff.
Right.
Nothing is going to be spelled out clearly. It's going to be codified.
Yes.
Anyhow, I'm observing this from around 2013 till 2018. I was logging into it every day, and I was weighing in eventually on some subject matter. I'm like, okay, they're talking about something. Now, I was a member of the public, and I could sign up, and I could be part of this forum. Dan was talking. Marcy McDowell was talking, his handler.
Right.
Other members of Majestic that sometimes would weigh in. And the people that surround Dan, which I call his handlers, would weigh in. And they'd be talking about stuff. And I would offer some input. And I was always respectful, because I noticed that they're extremely condescending to people who are not respecting Dan.
Really?
Oh, absolutely. It's very strange.
Okay.
So eventually, I'm a regular enough contributor that I think they had a comfort level with me. And they put up a request to the public that could join Dan and Marcy and their team on this outing that they do every year near Frenchman Mountain to collect some material in this geological location that's very important to Dan's work with his Lotus study.
Yes.
And it required, hiking, spend a day, food, lunch would be taken care of. So I weighed in and said, I'd love to.
Who wouldn't?
I'd love to. And I get this message in a private message on the forum from Dan's handler saying something to the effect of, Dan has you in mind for something different. Stand by. We're going to arrange for you to talk to him.
What were you thinking at that point?
What the hell is this cloak and dagger stuff I'm dealing with?
Yeah.
I just thought maybe they'd say, yes, you can go. Here's where we're going to show up. So they eventually give me a phone number and a date and time to call the number. And I called it. It was in 2018. And I talked to Dan. And Dan and I talked for an hour and a half. And I wasn't there on the phone call to question Dan about his stuff he did with the alien at S4.
Oh, where would you?
I didn't want to go there. I wanted to stay with what the subject matter on the forum was.
Yeah.
Dan, I'd be very happy to help you and this and that. He goes, well, you know what? I need somebody like you for something else. And he went on to outline this request with his work with his Lotus study, which is an ancillary project he's doing on his own with some help from some others, trying to understand this genetic code, this kind of like Genesis, this God particle.
Yeah.
This micro wormhole that opens when there's a certain kind of light refracting from this certain kind of silicate material.
Right.
That seems to answer a lot of questions as it has to do with the seed of life. way over my head.
Yeah, mine too. But
Right.
fascinating stuff.
So I said, Dan, I'm a graphic designer. I don't know this scientific material. He says, that's okay, because I'm going to get this published eventually and peer reviewed. And I want to make sure that somebody from the public can understand it. So I would like to send you material and have you weigh in on it. And I said, that's fine. Please do me a favor. Whatever you send me, try to prompt it with what I'm looking at or what I'm supposed to be looking for in the material. And he would tell me on the forum, sometimes in private email, we set up a Proton mail, and sometimes in private messages on the forum, he would tell me when there's going to be another drop of material. And he would send me screenshots. He sent me charts. And in one case, he sent me a video he made, which my name is on the title. None of it was prompted. And I'm like, okay, this isn't making sense to me. I'm not helpful here. And I would write back to him and say, Dan, what's the deal? I'm not able to understand any of the stuff you're sending me.
Yeah.
And it's almost like it was a test. I didn't know why it was a test, but I couldn't help. So some time passes, and eventually they decide that they looked into my background. They looked into my social media. They fed me a name of about 12 people that they didn't like that I'm following. They questioned my authenticity and trustworthiness, and they eventually blocked me. So
It's so
so
weird.
weird.
Yeah. And it's so like you're saying, like maybe he was giving you some kind of test, like maybe testing how much time you were going to spend trying to piece this together.
I'd be careful of the word he.
Okay.
A
Them.
lot of the operations that happen by virtue of this forum, Majestic, is
Yeah.
not Dan himself.
Okay.
He's surrounded by people who are trying to manage him.
Right.
So I was often, after speaking with Dan, and I had his personal email, and he and our exchanges were great. I mean, we talked about getting together and having a beer.
Yeah, he seems like a very personable guy.
Very nice guy.
Yeah.
Instead, his people were the ones contacting me when I was raising questions.
Right.
And
it does, in the history of it, they do seem to kind of keep a tight control over how the information is released, what information is released.
Perhaps.
It's interesting. Like some of the videos from the eagledisobey.net and stuff seem very cryptic. And
yeah.
You know, I think I saw one where it looked like what they were implying was that they could record in secret areas if they wanted to, almost as like a warning to MJ12. Did you see that video?
I have it on my website. You're talking about the mysterious recording they did with the handheld camera?
Yes.
And it gave me the impression that they might have walked through S4.
Possibly in some tunnel.
And they decided to down-res it so it's hard to see.
Yes.
And it was almost like a poke at Majestic and McConnell.
Yes.
Look what we're able to do now. You guys are not doing your job.
Right.
And it gives this impression that they're above the law. They have access. Listen, there is a lot of weirdness.
Oh, all these stories there is.
Story.
Yeah.
And their decision about what to put out to the public does not help their case if there is an agenda. It is almost meant to confuse.
And see, but to someone like me, that almost adds to the curiosity of it, you know, because I think about if this is real and MJ12 said, hey, go tell them. They're not going to believe you anyway. And that's what he did. And then kind of just wanted to get back to work. It seems like there was a few attempts to kind of platform him maybe, and that just didn't work out well, probably due partial to the George Knapp thing. But I think once he realized, to me anyway, it seems like once he realized how ridiculous that all was, it was like, okay, well, see you guys later. I'm back to my microbiology.
Through the research you can find on all of the material, the reason Dan had an opportunity to speak openly and come forward was by virtue of one of the agreements.
Okay. See, so it wasn't a vote. It
was that you can tell the world now. So if we're to believe these were called the T9 treaties, the T9, they happen every 9 years, up until around 2002, no, 2006. I don't know what the date was where they ended. One of them was you could tell the world. And Majestic looked at Dan and said, you're going to be the one. Dan never wanted it. He never wanted to be the face of disclosure.
That is the impression you get.
One of the criticisms I was very vocal on the forum of Dan's golden thread was, why in God's name did you go to ufology? At the time, there was To the Stars that came out. What did
Yes.
To the Stars do? They made it a major media event that was not directed at ufology. They made it a major media event that resulted in a New York Times article. Dan essentially, whether deliberately or a byproduct of just the subject matter, it went to ufology. And ufology is a riffraff group of people backstabbing each other, quite honestly. This is actually something we
You're
both
right.
agreed on in the call that I had with him, is this is not a helpful and engaging population of people who are just assassinating the character of each other constantly, which happens
Unfortunately.
today. That's why I stay under the radar for the most part.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, he, in my opinion, he wasn't managed well in his execution of this idea of telling the world. But in hindsight, I think that allowed them to check the box of the agreement. And that's what that was for.
Now you did extensive research in what I think is probably the darkest area of this study, which is the abduction thing. You mentioned the MILAB thing. For folks that are not familiar, how did you get into the MILAB thing? Like, how did that all transpire? How did that happen for?
That was actually one of my first forays into the subject matter way before Dan. In 1990, my first talk I attended of Bill Hamilton's, I attended, and the subject matter was MILABs. And I was just over trying to understand Bob Lazar, somebody that seemed to be sounding like he's in the sciences. He sounds credible. It sounds like he really did work at the place. And I'm attending this talk where Bill Hamilton is talking about his evidence of covert surveillance done on people having alien abductions, and that this covert surveillance happens where people are re-abducted, not by aliens, but by the U.S. military.
Wow.
And this made no sense to me whatsoever. But at the talk at the time, he had somebody that was talking about her MILAB episodes. She was having alien abductions, and she was impregnated, and the fetus was taken. But also, covert military would show up in the middle of the night, take her up to a nearby helipad, and fly her off to various places, including China Lake, where she'd be taken underground, and she would be gone through psi tests. She would be grilled. What are they telling you? What kind of knowledge are they telling you when they're abducting you? It was almost like they were being used as a knowledge-based guinea pig.
Like they were trying to like reverse MK Ultra the aliens or something.
They wanted to know everything they could from these abductees. That was done very, very covertly and at a complete crime against humanity in the way that they would do this. And you have to understand, in like the early 1990s, the subject of alien abductions was so incredibly taboo. And I'm not saying it's not now, but it has come a long way.
Yes.
That it was dealing with something that was almost, I can only imagine, a guy where you feel like you can't even talk about that with people around you.
Yeah.
Here they're having alien abductions. They've had children taken from them, and then the military's coming in and taking them, and then covertly surveilling their place. Now, when I saw this talk in 1990, this individual, with the help of Bill Hamilton's research, was showing these helicopters. Again, this idea of black helicopters came out of this kind of scenario. She had dozens and dozens of these photographs of these helicopters over her house, unmarked black helicopters. Now, the interesting thing about this individual is I knew where she lived. It was actually nearby where I lived.
Okay.
And at the time, I was playing pickup soccer at a nearby park. And one of the guys that was always showing up lived in that neighborhood where she lived. And I remember one day, hey, he doesn't know anything about my interest in UFOs. I said, by the way, in your neighborhood, do you ever get these black military helicopters? He goes, oh, yeah, they come in all the time. They hover in my canyon where I live. and there's nothing on these helicopters. Like, okay, well, there's an anecdotal support for that. So I know
Right.
what's happening to this woman. Anyway, long story short, that's how I got into that. And I befriended a number of people besides her to help her with her investigations. I was able to document some of these helicopters myself, some of the surveillance being done on her, how deep it goes, how sophisticated it goes. I got into
So,
that aspect of it. Yeah.
so you saw, did that scare the shit out of you?
Well, it was bringing into reality one of these, and it's happened to a lot of investigators. These oh shit moments. This is real.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I cussed on your show. I didn't mean to do that.
No, please cuss. I encourage cussing.
It was a revelation of an oh shit moment.
Yeah.
This is more complex than just, our space brothers visiting us. This is
Yeah.
getting into deep military. Well, okay, so military is a funny word. I think it's private aerospace that's doing some of this, and private investigators.
Now,
Aerospace.
okay. Now
Yeah. Yeah,
when you say that, I
I
think,
know.
yeah. So what are your, that's fascinating. Let me ask you this, totally off topic, not related. Have you looked at the Amy Eskridge case at all or heard about it?
I have been made aware of it. I have
Yeah.
seen her interview. The primary one that everybody points to, she mentions she mentions J Rods and
Yes.
the
Yes.
human lineage, but somebody pointed that out to me recently. Like, hey, look, even she talked about it.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you're going there, but
I just thought it was
reevaluated
interesting.
on-
Yeah.
Sorry?
And she's in, I just thought it was interesting. And she was in that same aerospace, industry.
Yeah, and she's even had Hal put off at her house, apparently.
Right.
There's some mystery there that I don't know enough about to speak and feel qualified enough to weigh in on.
Yeah.
But I will say that her referencing the things related to Dan Burisch without using his name, she talks about the future humans that go by she uses the term P plus 52 and P plus 47s.
Yeah. I think she
I'm not familiar with
maybe
47.
got it wrong a little bit or something, but yeah.
That was not, because somebody was giving me this as in context to how it's stuff that Hal Puthoff talked about. I rewatched the interview. It's long after her talking about Hal. And
Yes.
It's kind of like anecdotally, she's talking about something she heard. It didn't help that she was drunk because she was
Clearly.
she
Yeah.
clearly was drinking some beers. And,
Yeah.
um,
Which, hey, if I'm being messed
I
with
think
like
she's
that,
wrong, but just didn't help.
yeah, I might be drinking a lot of beers too,
I might too.
if that was really happening. But it is a fascinating story, and it's one that almost like Dan has kind of grabbed my attention. Like it's almost like and I think there was a quote I actually wanted to reference from your site. It says it's been a long-term humorous take of mine on ufology that the authentic accounts, and you capitalize authentic accounts, and testimonies actually receive the least attention. This continues right to this moment in time. So what would you say is something out there that's not getting a lot of attention that's getting a lot of your attention?
Well, you mean besides Burisch, which I think is
Well, yeah, the Burisch goes without saying, obviously, but is it,
right.
what would be something else that you've seen kind of recently that's really
Well,
big?
not recently, but there's another historic dusting off of the testimony of late NASA mission specialist Bob Exler, who was back in the day taken to a zero gravity room that we have here in the States, and that supposedly is an impossibility.
Right, I was going to say that doesn't exist.
Yeah, right. So it gets me thinking. Yeah, and I have a paper I wrote on it, and I'm not sure where I put it up on my X space, and I can send you a copy of it.
Yeah, I'd love it.
But it details how, we've got people like Bob Exler who has spoken openly about his knowledge because he was in the room, in one of these rooms. That is a zero G room. We do have and have harnessed zero gravity, not necessarily with the methodology in scientific physics that Bob Lazar talks about. So I decided to dust this off and put it out there because we had recent testimony from people like J.T. Long, who was testifying at the Washington Press Club as part of a group of people that included Stephen Greer brought out Michael, the gentleman that went to Indonesia and saw the craft.
Well, yes. I'm not I'll add it later, but I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
So this guy comes up saying he was taken to a facility to work on something as a contractor, and he saw this gigantic levitating object that was rectangular, and it made no sense to him. Like he's looking under it going, how's this thing levitating? And Bob Exler was taken to a zero-G room. This was in the early 1990s. Zero gravity. We have it.
Right.
This is something we that could probably solve a lot of issues. So why isn't this being talked about? So
Great question.
That's one of those. I'm trying to think what else. I mean, just the knowledge of the sophistication of the deep underground cities that are likely built, and the trillions of dollars and man hours. Now, there's another thing that's unfolded recently. I'll tell you about because I'm very, very close with the person who's leaking this. Is what's going on in Sedona right now.
Okay.
And the what looks to be some sort of military operation or aerospace operation unfolding nightly, where there are craft being seen, orbs being seen, flying in and out of a canyon north of Sedona, escorted by military helicopters, as if there is an operation training going on nightly, and it has been for the past couple of years. Melinda Leslie has made this aware, and it resulted in a News Nation piece with Ross Coulthart, who went out and saw this same operation going down.
Which is incredible. I mean, right in front of their eyes, in front of the camera, they have night vision goggles on, and you can watch it unfold right there.
And it's happening just about every night, and it's a gigantic operation. It infers also that there must be a very large subterranean facility that these must be flying out of, which then begs the question, how big are the doors that have to open up on the desert floor? Because where this is happening, there is nothing there.
It's so weird.
It's so weird, but it's pretty well documented now.
What's your take on these boogospheres? Got any thoughts on those?
I don't know, but except that I don't like that people are criticizing him now because the etching on the sphere looks like it could have been man-made. I think that that's a very weak argument, because the overwhelming phenomenon around it has to do with other things besides worrying about the etching of it. It is changes its weight. It changes to hot to cold, and now they're demonstrating now that it has some properties in its metal that are anomalous, and that it might be sending out a frequency currently.
I just saw that, with the fiber optics inside. They think it may be some sort of sensor or something that's sending out readings. It is. It's really. I've looked at things that it could be. Try to kind of explain what this might be, like if it's not real, if it's just a hoax or whatever. But yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, if what they're showing on the inside of it is legitimate, good Lord,
whatever
what
that
is
legitimate is. Here's the thing I'll offer that was actually it was an investigative philosophy that Bill Hamilton had back in the day. He's got his red basket, he's got his orange basket, he's got his green basket.
Okay.
It's rare that something makes it to the red basket, which means there's absolutely nothing to it. Ignore it. Hold things in an orange basket. I don't know enough about the boogosphere to write it off. I'm not going to go out of my way to say absolutely not. That's a complete BS, because somebody found that it looks like it's handmade etchings on it. What do I know about the way these things operate in the way that the etching happens by a non-human intelligence? I don't know that from Adam. You would
100%.
imagine it would be absolutely precision and precise. But there's too much around that phenomenon with that object that has less to do with how the etching was made and more to do with the anomalous properties of it than for you to take this one aspect and use that for criticism. So I find very little in my red basket. I have more in my orange basket that says, just hold on to it. You need more data. Don't go out of your way to expend energy cutting down the people who are interested in it and the science that they're using to study it. Move on to something else until more comes along.
I like it.
There are so many people on X and in other aspects of studying the phenomenon that are expending unnecessary amounts of energy, cutting people down, cutting down the investigations of others.
Yes.
And it going right to the jugular, which is their character.
Yes.
Give me a break. Just move on. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, yes, you do get a lot in X, especially in the spaces, and I try to be open. There are a couple of, to me, like I think if your intention is honest and good in this field, great. Just like anything else, there's going to be grifters. You know what I mean? There's grifters in every space. Like there's grifters in the pots and pans space. I mean, it's going to happen. This is the world we live, or at least in America, this is the world we live in. It's a capitalistic type society. People are going to try to cash in.
Human nature.
Yeah, yeah. So I get that. I don't have a problem with, like I think I talked to somebody and they were like, "Oh, did you know Travis Walton charged Kurt Chimongal like $200 for an hour interview or something?" And I was like, "So who cares?" I don't mind a guy telling his story and making some money because it's that big of a deal or whatever. But it's to me, it's when you're misleading on purpose. Then I get weirded out.
Or if your ability to engage in wanting to profit might cloud your ability to be truthful because you're trying to exploit and create interest to keep the money flow.
Right.
Then you're setting yourself from serious criticism.
Yeah.
Occasionally somebody writes a book. By the way, back in the day when you wrote a book, this is what I had to study when I was that's the only way I can find stuff is what I read in books. It didn't mean somebody was lying because they're profiting. It's because they're trying to chronicle it for other people to read.
Yeah. So and they got to feed themselves in the meantime.
Ask anybody and do yourself a favor the next time you're at a conference and you talk to somebody who wrote a book. How much are you profiting by your book? They probably laugh you in the face and say, this is not the way you make money.
Right.
Make money and write a book, choose a different subject. So there's some very weak arguments in ufology for why somebody must be red flagged. To your point, if you stick to the data, if you stick to the patterns that influence a relative belief, because there's aspects of it that seem to jive with something else you've heard or read or investigated, patterns are a good way to justify something becoming more legitimate.
Right.
And then it gets beyond that, it starts to become very personal. Now, my investigation into Dan is one that's based on the data that's out there, but also my personal experience, not only with my friendship with Bill Hamilton, but my friendship with Dan. Now that's not something I can easily convey to somebody else.
Sure.
Now it's personal. I can only tell you I had the phone call, the feeling I got from him. I can only tell you the principal investigator, Bill Hamilton, was a friend of mine. Those things I know I can't hand over to you to use for justification.
Right.
It's personal to me.
Right.
There's other aspects of that are very open source. Dan's case is full of open source material.
Yeah. Why do you think it's such an emotionally charged subject?
Because it's an emotionally charged subject. We're talking about our future. We're talking about another life form that potentially could be positioned as an apex predator to us, which we are not used to as humanity.
It's a lot to grapple with.
And it dips into other aspects of our humanity. It dips into our understanding of science. It dips into our understanding of spirituality and our faith. It can dip into a lot of that. Some of it falsely, but and to give over to somebody that you believe it, you risk giving up some aspect of yourself.
Absolutely.
In hopes that somebody else will understand you, that you believe it. I mean,
very well said.
It is a difficult one. I'm sympathetic to the challenges people have just within their own family structure. I have that problem currently. I have a son who's an engineer who's very staunchly, he's supportive of me and he's attended some of my talks and high-fived me. But I know deep down he holds very hard to his roots in his science as he was taught.
Right.
Some of the stuff I talk about is not possible.
Right.
So I get it.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That helps answer.
If anything, like the more we're progressing in the sciences, right? So I set my phone so like I don't get political updates. I just get science updates on my phone on my news app, and so I get all the really cool new kind of popular science, popular mechanics, that kind of stuff updates. And it's interesting because it's like the more advanced we're getting, the more we're finding out we don't have a freaking clue.
Right.
Like all of a sudden the universe is younger than we thought. And, I read a report that says we might be in a black hole. And I read a report about other dimensions all around us. And, it's like the more we're exploring, the more we're finding out maybe science isn't really like we were brought up to think it was, that this is the answer, that, the consensus answer is the way it is, when there's things, a lot of things science just can't explain, and
That should be the normal evolution of innovative thinking and scientific discovery. And I think even Einstein has been quoted as saying something as such. It's like, what we know now is just what we know now. And there are scientific principles we should still hold strong to until something can challenge them. But this is the argument I keep having with my son. I said, listen,
I can imagine
it's what's funny is he went to Cal Poly, San Luis
okay.
Obispo, and he was on the CubeSat program there. And ironically, one of the materials they used there in their labs had to come from Bob Lazar's scientific group that, he sells scientific instruments.
Yes.
He said, Dad, I remember pulling open this drawer and we get I forget what material it was. It had a receipt still and it had Bob Lazar's signature.
Yeah.
So he's like, okay, on one hand, he goes, God, this guy's for real. At least he's in the sciences. He's selling scientific equipment. And I would occasionally remind my son, I said, remember, he talked about the scientific theory of how anti-gravity works and the use of 115 and all this. He goes, yeah, but I don't believe that stuff.
Yeah.
It's because Bob was asking us to suspend for a moment what we know now and look to a future, because he was witness to a scientific discovery that he was testing, lab testing, bench testing.
Yes.
And it's like my son's like, yeah, but now I can't. God, I can't believe it. Okay.
Wow. Well, I get it though, because that's what you're taught, and I think you're also taught at that when you get into those higher echelons that, thinking outside of this can be dangerous, because we're dealing with propulsion systems and life and death situations. And, and what does he have any thoughts on what Weinstein says about maybe they took the crazier sciences and just kept them off the books?
No, I don't think we ever talked about Weinstein.
It's pretty interesting. His whole thing about, there was physics was going in a certain direction. There was a lot of hype about this anti-gravity stuff like in the 50s. And it appears that maybe some very wealthy connected to CIA folks came in, kind of gathered that group together, like T. Townsend Brown and all them, and either bought them out or gave them kind of a underground working area, like,
right,
keep this off the books. We're going to keep teaching the safe stuff in schools, and you develop this cool stuff off the books.
I know, but Gabriel, that's conspiracy.
I know.
Conspiracy still does not sit well with a lot of people, because you're asking them to suspend what they feel comfortable knowing in advantage of them learning something that is secret, and them to suspend their judgment. And people are perfectly happy living their daily lives, not worrying about conspiracy. I have two sisters that have kids and grandkids. And there's sometimes, with my knowledge of all the weirdness that I've been studying for 37 years, that I almost wish I didn't know, because I envy my sisters' lives. They love their kids, their grandkids, having family get-togethers and this. And they know I'm into the subject, but they have nothing to offer. And I don't feel like I want to go out of my way to tell them they're living in a world where there's so much lies and conspiracy and dark secrets and alien abduction. It's like, sometimes I go, you know what? I really wish I didn't get this deep into this.
Yeah. You got to take a break from it sometimes, right?
Well, a break is one thing, but it's still there.
It's still there. Yeah. It's still consuming your thoughts. And
yeah.
I've
had some serious shit moments beyond the original one I talked to you about, when I was sitting with some very high level investigators and journalists and abductees who I've had here, and they're in tears talking about things that happen to them that they know happen to them. And it's like it's sometimes you go try to go to bed at night and suspend some of
Yeah.
this stuff.
Yeah.
And it's like every investigator has that. I know they have had it where sometimes there's things that you learn that are just so confronting and they're right there. And you go, in all of my perception of my being reasonable with what I feel like I know, this is confronting that in a really hard way. I
Yeah.
don't know how to get past it.
And do you think that's why so many people are putting it in this good, evil, aliens or demon context? It's just easier to say demon.
Yeah, I do.
What do you think about that? Because it is kind of out there in the zeitgeist now. It's like, I just read a report. More young people are signing up at the Catholic Church than they have in years, and you hear it kind of out there like, hey, if these aliens are messing with us, you got to have like a center, and you got to rely on God, and because these are demons, and the Collins elite spin, and the government. What do you make of all that?
Well, now you're getting into really personal territory.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm a Catholic.
Okay.
I raised my boys Catholic, mass all the time, and I still go on retreats every year. I go on a silent retreat every year.
Excellent.
And ironically, the Catholic Church is one of those who's trying to get ahead of this. The
Yes.
Vatican has been very open and trying to be ahead of the acknowledgement of another species as the creation of God. And there is even biblical text that suggests that
Many.
the limitation of God's creation wasn't just on the planet Earth, that we have to be open to that. But I also, with my faith, have been raised in understanding there is good and evil, and there's demonic possession, and there's demonic influence.
Yes.
But I'm also aware that by virtue of faith in the teachings of faith, you have to have faith in understanding the mystery of knowing true demonic influence and true demonic manifestation. And that's something very personal to every single person.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And this is something I have no answer for, except every individual is going to wrestle with that in their own way. If we find that there is a visiting human species that has been time traveling here, and there's a physicality and advanced knowledge, then where is the demonic fit in?
Right.
Because to me, I'm certain there is demonic qualities to some things. That just
seems like there has to be.
That seem to be outside the realm of the alien studies that I'm aware of.
Yes. Yes. Well, I read a report, it was several years ago, but something like the church had performed around, God, it was like 6 figures exorcisms in Europe. It was like 100 and something thousand exorcisms in a year in Europe or something a few years back. So yeah, there's that's out there too, right? And it's interesting that it's getting mixed up with this alien thing, and it makes you wonder if it's just you get outside of that comfort level, and then you're like, oh, okay, I'm gonna go back to this thing that's safe and I trust and I know has worked for thousands of years.
It is an easy acknowledgement for that which you may not understand. And I don't want to knock that because maybe I'm being spun.
I don't think so. See, I think that like what allows me to feel okay about investing and exploring all this is that I have my personal beliefs, and like that line I'm not going to cross. And so for me, like, it's okay to look at these things, right? Like, but when you start to me, when you start getting outside of that exploring to, oh, maybe I'm wrong. And maybe I guess I'm having a hard time put this into words. I see this I've seen this with many folks that explore this area, this field, or I've seen it with a lot of friends and stuff that explore this field where they get very dark because like you're saying, you start realizing like there's this whole other thing going on where like you stop caring about watching Friends every week because you're like, there's people being abducted, like why does anybody care? And then you have to like, well, you can't live your life like that, right? What kind of life is that going to be if you're just freaking out all the time? We find ourselves here talking about it, and I don't know. I guess my question is, where do you see this going? I mean, I've seen you in some X spaces and stuff, listening to folks talking, and you do what you do. You know, you sit back and observe, and I wonder what's Brian thinking right now, like what he's seen, you know, because you've seen this evolve for a long time, and I
Yeah.
wonder what you're thinking
And
about.
I've drawn some conclusions, and I'll give you an example of one by virtue of understanding the Burisch claims. What's evident, and that you're going to have to be part of understanding, is that there's agreement. Okay, that's part of the claims. You just have to,
Yes.
if you're going to understand the whole story, you're going to have to acknowledge, which I presume a lot of people don't see that as that big of a step, that we have had an ongoing relationship with these intelligences. I'm hesitant to use the term non-human because I think,
They might be
well, I'm talking about the ones surrounding the Dan Burisch claims.
right.
Those supposedly are future humans.
Yes.
I'm aware of, by virtue of the sheer numbers of testaments of abductees of other species,
Yes.
the reptilians, insectoids. There's a lot of others that are outside of Dan Burisch's claims.
Yes.
So I don't know about those, but let's just say for a moment we've got agreements. If we have agreements and we're trying to manage this, and those agreements have been offered to our governing bodies on this planet, then that must mean that there's things that are being done in the shadows to manage those agreements.
Yes.
Maybe we wouldn't agree with, and maybe some we would agree with. So this brings me to the final scene of A Few Good Men.
Okay.
When Colonel Jessup eventually explodes and says, "There's stuff we are doing essentially." He says, "There's things we have to do every day that you wouldn't agree with. We rise and sleep every night, and you enjoy our freedoms, and there's things we have to do in the shadows that you may not like." Okay, so I have taken that to heart, and I remember even, for those who care, Tom DeLonge even said it as such. There's stuff that these guys are doing behind the scenes. Let's call them majestic, military industrial complex, whatever. Some of these guys have to do shit day and night that you wouldn't agree with.
Right.
That scares the crap out of them, but they have to.
Yes.
And that's one of the reasons they can't tell you. Can't tell you with a
Right.
capital C, because
Right.
you're not supposed to know this, you know? So agreements might yield a deeper understanding for why the secrecy might be happening.
Yeah.
There are things that maybe are trying to be managed that it'll just screw everything up.
Yeah. And you got to imagine with time, you know, if time travel's there, if you have people going outside that agreement, it's going to affect so much, you know, like, if you all agree, like, we're going to manage this timeline this way, and someone's like, no, I'm going to go back and build a pyramid or whatever, that's going to screw things up, you know, and then we're going to have to deal with the aftermath of that.
Yeah. I'll give you an example also is, we've been made aware, for those who are deep into the study of the subject, we've been made aware that the aliens have on many occasions conveyed to us how nuclear weapons are off the table. You cannot use them because they have quantum effects universally, and that is not an option. So we have not used a nuclear weapon, and we just ended up having to bomb Iran to make sure they don't use a nuclear weapon.
Yes.
Some of that may not necessarily be Trump flexing his military prowess. That might be because that's not supposed to happen, and we had to do that to honor those agreements, and that there hopefully will never be a future where that ever happens, because apparently that has quantum universal implications. So I consider that in the factor now. So I see the news now every day that is unfolding through a couple of filters: the everyday man filter, and the like, this might be happening behind the scenes. There's supposed to be like, there's might be another agenda at hand here.
Yeah.
So I kind of look at it through both. I don't draw any conclusions, but I like take that into consideration.
Open mind.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is interesting that such a show was made of that. That we had to stop them from getting those nukes. I thought that was really interesting. The recent Wall Street Journal report, I don't know if you checked that out at all, but I find it easier to believe that a UFO came down and disarmed that thing than we put an EMP and shot it at our own nuclear weapons. I mean,
Yeah.
really?
So
Like, we're supposed to believe we did that?
I think that there's two factions, deep state factions. One's called Majestic, and let's just call the other one Illuminati. And there's aligned agendas with different alien factions.
Right.
And the different alien factions are wanting to see a future where the catastrophe can still happen to justify their existence, and that anything that they can do to steer people away from the love and light alien agenda, but that it's something that we need to make sure that the catastrophe happens.
Right.
That's that agenda. That's the Illuminati. That's the P+45 rogues, not the P+52 that Dan worked on.
Right.
Would love for the catastrophe to be bypassed. There's still these two factions working together. So when I heard of that article and how absolutely poorly investigated it was, but there was still an intention to put it out there that there's nothing to the subject and all these people are just nut jobs. To me, I go, that's that faction still trying to operate and try to put this thing down.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's, I don't know. That's my own personal side that I,
What do you, so I know you've met John Ramirez, right?
oh yeah.
Did you see his interview on Area 52, the recent one?
I was aware of the highlights.
Yeah. Have you heard those stories from him before?
I've heard a lot of stories from John.
Yeah.
Now be more specific, like which he was making.
Well, so he kind of went over his whole story, but I think the things that really stuck out were his abduction experiences, and how he thinks that kind of led him into the intelligence field, and then some visitations he had.
Yeah, right.
From some beings, and then this whole 2027 thing as well. And what's your take on that, on all that?
Well, I'm trying to remember what he said about the veracity of that, because it was coming from people who were channeling, as I recall. Right?
Yes, yeah, and he had kind of been pointed in these different directions by CIA, like, hey, go check this out. It's not an official CIA thing, but these people kind of know what's going on. And then he gets to the hotel and it's a bunch of CIA people there and they're talking about abductions. And
there's that, and there's the Chris Bledsoe stuff that essentially says the same thing. This is where, in my everyday belief on the subject, I have to hold reservation. What I will tell you, and anybody that's been into this as long as I have, is every few years there's a prediction that something's right around the corner. It's about to happen. I heard this in 92 from a number of investigators. We think disclosure is going to be next year. There's so many pulse points of data inside intelligence that are suggesting next year is going to be the year they're going to disclose. That was the early 90s. We're now in 2025. And for me personally, take it for what it's worth, I'm hearing yet another claim.
No, now, I'm with you, Brian. Yeah.
I don't know. And everybody has to personally decide how much they want to internalize that. And then what? Act on it? What are we going to do?
Yeah.
I had a journalist who believes this wholeheartedly saying, Brian, within the next year, you need to get out of California. I'm like, okay, I hear you. And you tell me what you base that on, based on XYZ person you told me you talked to. Am I ready to uproot, tell my kids, my family, I'm moving? Why, Brian? Everybody's talking about this. People are talking about it X. We're talking about it because we're hearing it from John Ramirez. We're hearing it from a number of the
Ross Coulthart. Yeah. Ross Coulthart, Chris Bledsoe. Yeah, all those guys.
Okay, so how much do we want to make that an actionable thing?
Right.
Okay, it sounds incredible. It makes you, within the realm of studying the subject, makes you like heightened and aware, and like, it's great fodder for talking on X. So let's just draw a conclusion here. What do you want to do?
Not shit. I mean, what can you do?
Do you want to hang your hat on the legitimacy of that? Pull up strings, get a real estate agent, sell your place, move someplace? No, I'm not laughing. It's just, let's be honest, Gabriel, we're talking about something incredibly serious. It could be a major visitation. It could be a major cataclysm. It could be an asteroid. It could be any number of things. How much do you want that to dwell, linger, fester to the point where you're freaking out?
Right. And then what kind of life are you living?
Right.
You're just...
I still have one life. As far as I'm aware.
Yeah.
And I'm not getting any younger every day. If I change everything about my life based on a prediction, come on.
Yeah. And it makes you wonder, why do we keep being told, like, like the football keeps, or the goalpost keeps getting moved, down the road. And it's like, what's the constant state of anxiousness? What is that? Why are they trying to keep us so anxious
No, no,
about something
no,
that's about to
no,
happen?
Gabriel, don't get me wrong. There might be a deep reality to that.
You think so?
Well, I'm not saying it's not. I'm just saying,
Yeah.
how much do you, as the recipient of hearing about this, not being the one who experienced it, like maybe a Chris Bledsoe?
Right.
I mean, he supposedly experienced this with the knowledge.
Yeah.
How much do you want that to be an actionable part of your life that you now have to pivot and do something different about? That's a very, very personal decision with everybody who hears that. And I don't know personally how I would handle that. I hear it, and yeah, it freaks me out. It's like, and now I'm like, okay, based on everything going on in the news, there's some preparation for something, and X, Y,
Yeah.
Z. It's a very personal thing. How much you are going to let that weigh on you to where you are going to make it adjust your life with the loved ones and people around you that you live with every day.
Right. Right. And kids, that are
Right.
supposed to inherit this future. Yeah,
Uh, it's,
it's interesting. And so I hope you don't think I'm crazy after this, but last night, I'm not kidding. I sometimes, I don't have dreams often, but when I do, they're very vivid. Just last night, of course, I'm thinking about this interview, last few days. What am I going to ask Brian? How am I going to keep Brian interested, and so I'm in my bed I'm sleeping. One of the most intense dreams I've ever had in my life. I'm not even kidding, Brian. I was somehow transported into a car with I I don't know if it was a J Rod or just a gray alien, but it fit that image. And it looked me right in the face and was like, "Do you really want to know I'm real?" And I was like, I do want to know. And he stuck out his hand to shake my hand and said, "I'm real." And I started just bawling, just like uncontrollable bawling, because all of a sudden, what do I know? And I woke up and it hit me like, that's a secret worth keeping, I guess. Because if you think, like, I think I'm somewhat sane. So if you took a bunch of people that weren't, maybe a little unstable and dropped this on them, holy shit.
yeah, no joke.
Like the
Very
Brookings
real.
Institute, like you think it's bad now,
We didn't even talk about this stuff.
my God,
There are
like,
people. Yeah, go ahead.
no, I just go ahead, please. Cause it's like, that report, Dan even refers to it. Like people can handle this, they couldn't handle it. They said at the Brookings Institute, it would blow people's minds, riots in the streets, economies crashing,
I'm,
governments
I'm a
falling
full,
apart.
I'm a full-blown believer that I don't think we're ready for this. So as much as there's people pounding on the pavement of Washington, D.C. and the Capitol and trying to get disclosure, I'm sitting back going, not sure that's a good idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
No,
Especially,
just because, we touched on, I want to come back around. You touched on this idea that just think about the amount of people that are out there. Let's go back from the 60s to today, where if you claimed you heard voices in your head, you're being sent to an institution. Okay. Well, guess what? We may be finding, by virtue of the analysis of abductees, the science behind how this could be done, that it's possible. And that, yeah, things like this, which we thought drove people mad and they must be crazy, they were actually one of the few who are getting some sort of connection or download or connection with a phenomenon.
yeah.
Yeah, think about all the people we labeled as absolutely crazy.
Right.
I remember doing a hike in the Los Angeles nearby mountains here, the San Gabriel Mountains, with a friend of mine that I graduated school with. This is in the mid 80s. And in this canyon, we found this hermit, this guy living there. And we had to pass him on the trail we're on. And he was like, we stopped and talked to him. So, what are you doing here? Oh, I live here. I like it here. It's great, And I have an implant in my head. And there is a device up in the sky right now that's connected with me, and it talks to me. And I remember
Wow.
thinking, God, this is exactly the kind of person that probably should be in an institution right now.
Yeah.
I don't want to have anything to do with this guy. We kind of slowly backed away and continued on the trail.
Right.
And then I'm hearing so many accounts of abductees having the same kind of thing happened. And I'm like, okay, the sheer numbers of people that it's happening to. I'm not saying they've got a device in the sky, although you could probably deconstruct MK Ultra technology to today, and we probably have that technology.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, this stuff's not crazy, but it makes people look crazy if it's seen in the wrong light.
Yeah. And I think that's why, I don't know if you're a fan of Jesse Michaels at all, but he has that Plato's Cave discussion at least once every few episodes where it's like, yeah.
I'm not sure I know that one.
So it's an old allegory of Plato's talking about these people facing a wall, and they're chained together. And behind them, there's a fire going on, and there's some people behind them making shadows in the fire. But the people facing the wall, their whole reality are these shadows. Right?
Oh, okay.
That's all they know. Yeah. And in the story, eventually one of them breaks loose, turns around, sees the people making the shadows in the fire, freaks out, like loses his mind, then finds out, oh my God, we're in a cave, then walks outside the cave, sees the whole world, blows his mind. He's like, I got to go tell these people they're staring at a wall of shadows. They're not even seeing real life. But he goes back to tell him, and he's a crazy one. And they try to get him to lock back up and stare back at the wall. And
no, that's a good metaphor.
Yeah, it's almost like what we're going through now. Like, are we, and like you're saying, was that guy really communicating with a thing in the sky and he wasn't crazy?
Well, the only bridge between those that are being deceived and the guy that was trying to point out that they were being deceived in what we're dealing with in this phenomenon is the data and the science and the investigation. So if he went back into the cave and could make a case by virtue of some investigation, some connecting some dots, he could have, then I would say that's the only bridge that has to be closed. But I get the metaphor is a great metaphor. And there's this great isometric image of a cylinder that from the side, it looks like a square. From another side, it looks like a circle. And from three-quarter view, it's a cylinder. And they're all truths.
Right. Right. It's fascinating. And I think that's another reason that the Burisch story gets me so much. Dan Burisch, Dan Crane's story, because it's like, it's not so simple, like, and that's how life is. It's not simple. It's very complicated. It's very confusing. There's a lot of interested parties, like, pulling the strings, trying to manipulate it in this way or that way. And I think that's what speaks to me is how human of a story it is, and that to me is more realistic than some of the other stuff that's out there in the zeitgeist, because if that is part of what's going on here, and I say part of because I think obviously there's other stuff going on too, or is it all connected? I don't know, but I think that looking at it through that lens, it's like what is the agenda of these guys like Ramirez and Doty and other folks coming out? Why does the CIA care about ufology? Why does there seem to be such a priority on how folks interested in this are looking at things?
Well, that's because there's a perception management that's trying to be done. There's an agenda, and perception management is a very important part of it. I remember John Ramirez telling me after he saw my presentation in San Francisco about the Burisch stuff. He said, it's my opinion that the stuff you're talking about, they don't want talked about. They want people to debate over blurry photos and poor videos and who the next whistleblower is going to be. But they don't want you knowing what the deeper backstory is that's beyond that. And that, to me, lends itself to why, in as much as, let's call it Majestic, the deep state, is trying to perception manage what ufology is right now.
Yeah.
And, it involves things like how, and not saying that necessarily there's a bunch of infiltrated psyop groups within ufology. I don't even know if you have to go that far. It's this subject matter and this realm of investigation and the people involved is an extremely, extremely small cross-section of society.
Right.
And that being as confined as it is within a walled garden of we're all watching the same videos, we're all seeing the same documentaries,
Yes.
probably very easy to manage it
Wow.
easily. I mean, nobody is into this subject.
Yeah.
This is after people keep calling it a community, like it's accredited, and we all have certificate of like accreditation. Oh, I'm a ufologist.
Right.
We're all we're all just we have a common interest in something that we can have a dialogue about. Don't
Yeah.
say that you're part of a community. It suggests that there's a group you have to be a member of.
Right. Right.
It's not that, and so we could be very easily managed with what stuff is being fed to us. That's why dusting off the Dan Burisch stuff and bringing it out and seeing what people think is valuable to me, because it's not part of the zeitgeist today.
No.
The zeitgeist today is congressional efforts to bring new whistleblowers. It's Jeremy and George's latest video they claim came from a government source.
Right.
It is podcasts. It is all this other stuff that's really actually pretty small and
Yeah.
manageable.
When I first started kind of researching this, and somebody told me, "Do you know who Jeremy McGowan is?" And I was like, "It sounds familiar, but I'm not sure." And they were like, "Well, the thing about this field is you do want to look at who's giving the information, and is there an agenda, or is it just like they're open and just trying to share and figure out what's going on?" And they encouraged me to read this 4-part paper that Jeremy McGowan had written on Medium about his experience with Elizondo. Have you looked at that at all? So I am going to have McGowan on soon, and it's pretty fascinating. So apparently and I don't know how true this is. I do know I had Luis Cayetano on about a week ago, and he wrote a paper on the OTAP ASIP, on the OSAP ATIP confusion. Good Lord. And in that paper, it's on Scientific America and education or something.edu. But in that paper, they use FOIA papers and research, and they show that basically ATIP and OSAP were the same thing.
Okay.
Right. And that one of them was the code name for the program. So like ATIP was the actual program. OSAP was a code name they were using when they were talking in non-cleared areas about the program, or, non-secured emails about the program. So basically it created this confusion about, is there two programs? Is it one, because you had some people that were cleared that knew about the program and there was a code name, and other people that weren't cleared that only knew the code name. And so it caused all this confusion about this program. ATIP, OSAP, same thing. That 22 million that Harry Reid, spent was already gone. And this program was essentially dead in the water. And Elizondo picked it up as kind of an after hours hobby. Put his name on a couple emails, sent the emails out right before he retired, and then retired saying he was in charge of this thing that was an after hours hobby that wasn't funded when he was looking at it. And, basically tried to say he was the guy. And I'm like, well, maybe he's got an ego, that's fine. But then you start reading more, and it's really disturbing. What he did so Jeremy McGowan, like, this guy is a hero, right? Like, this guy served in some crazy places in the mud for all of us, right? Like, real hero shit. And you read this account where he'd had this 20-year-old truck, an old Passport. He was interested in the UAP phenomena. He orders this camera. It's like a $1,200 camera, builds it himself, puts it on this old truck he has, right? It's convinced by, I won't name this person, that he should go take this truck to Elizondo's property in Wyoming and meet Elizondo. So he does. And Elizondo says, hey, we got to do a bunch of aerial, like, drone shooting with this truck and promoting this truck, this Osiris truck. I don't know if you heard about this Osiris truck, right? Like, we're going to make this truck is going to be like the UAP finder. Okay. And he decides that they're going to shoot this kind of promo for this truck. And they contact McGowan and they say, hey, we're going to have a Now, there's a lot of shady shit that happened in between this. Okay. You have to read the article. But he basically, long story short, he contacts McGowan. He says, we're going to try to get a show on like History Channel or Discovery Channel or something. And your vehicle will be kind of the crux of this show. And so they bring McGowan in for these meetings with these executives, and Lou's pitching him the show basically. And he's talking about how this vehicle it's got all the latest and greatest tech and all this crazy stuff. And it's like, it doesn't have any of that. It's got like one camera and a broken axle. It's like a 20-year-old Nissan Pathfinder. You know, I was doing it for a hobby. And he's telling these people it's got all the multi-million-dollar equipment. And he's like, what in the fuck are you talking about? And long story short, when he showed Elizondo some doubt, Elizondo told him he could remote view and see into his future, and that his ex-wife would become addicted to drugs, and that his daughter would go on and be very successful in college. And he figured out through other conversations that he had with people, Elizondo had cherry-picked this information from people around him. Uh-huh. And Elizondo didn't know that he knew Elizondo knew he had kids. So he had this conversation with a acquaintance of Elizondo's where he said his ex-wife is addicted, but she's addicted to exercise. Uh-huh. So when Elizondo sits him down and says he's remote viewing, he's thinking of the future, she's going to become addicted, and she's going to live her life addicted to drugs, and she's going to go down this toilet. And he's like, she was never addicted to drugs. She was addicted to working out.
I wonder if did he find the account that he must have seen that were used, and whatever that source was, that he latched onto that term addicted?
Well, so this brings in this third person that I don't want to name.
Okay.
But basically, this is the person that was accompanying McGowan in McGowan's ear, convincing him like, yeah, you need to work with Lou. You need to, and a little bit of research, you'll be able to find out who it was. And I'll tell you when we get offline if you just want to know. But basically, this guy was in McGowan's ear. And McGowan admittedly says, you know, I kind of lost sight of what I was doing. You know, like I just wanted to see if I could catch some weird craft. And all of a sudden I'm more worried about getting this special on history than I was about catching these craft. And so he's starting to realize how spun up he is. And when he's coming to this realization, Lou is trying to convince him he can see into the future. And to this day, he says he's still worried about one thing that Elizondo told him that's going to happen in his future. So even though he realizes it was complete bullshit, he's still a little bit scared of this thing this guy told him would happen in the future, right? And that pisses me off because I'm like, dude, Jeremy McGowan was a real war hero. And he had an interest in this subject. And you took that and just did a number on this guy to where he's not even going to research it anymore. He's done. Like he's off on the other things. He's over it. And this guy was super intelligent, career military, aerospace industry. I think he was involved with some folks at Skinwalker Ranch and some of their studies. I think he might even be in an episode or two there. This guy's the real deal. And just done with it just because of what was done to him by Elizondo. And I'm not like on the, you know, hate Elizondo thing. That to me is a real loss to the field. You know, we had a guy that was totally open to all this stuff and he just got chewed up and spit out. And I don't know if you've looked at any of old Lou Angelis's interviews with Lou Elizondo. Have you seen any of that stuff? So I just worry about him. I think, and folks like him because his mission is the money. So he has a plan. There goes my dog again. He has a plan. Okay. It's called a 5-phase plan that Jeremy McGowan outed in this article.
I see.
And this plan is very maniacal in that the idea it's in through phases. And the first part is coming out media blitz, right? Convincing the media this is a real thing. Second part involves like getting all these characters in the YouTube area and podcast field, like talking about it, thinking about it. Basically, when you get to the end of it, the overall plan is to take technology we already have, get an exclusive contract with the US government saying that you're reverse engineering alien technology. But what you're doing really is repackaging technology we already have and then selling it back to the taxpayer as reverse engineered technology. So it's just one big giant grift for millions of dollars that...
well, he's not helping himself by showcasing bad photos.
No. And
insofar as he might have that agenda,
yeah,
he doesn't surround himself with the best...
no, it wasn't executed.
Or manage, or
Yeah.
meddlers.
Yeah. It
So,
wasn't executed well, but
no.
that was his plan. Um, and so I think like, God, you start researching this stuff and you find yourselves in all these positions where,
Well, I'm
again,
perfectly happy knowing that there's questionable people for sure.
yeah,
And, and I'm concerned with people that latch everything that one person says all the time is that's the main source to pay attention to.
right.
It should never be one person.
That was kind of a wake up call for me because I
Yeah,
was like, I'm counting on Lou. Give me
yeah,
all this info. Well, if Lou's not who he says he is, but some of the
no.
info is legit. What do we do with that?
Well, now you're getting into like there's no investigative protocol that's shared that should be the norm for people like you and I. My investigative protocol is to look for patterns, look at history, look for correlation, and not trust just one person.
Right.
It has to come from a lot of different disparate places to help support um, whatever your truth is that you're looking for.
Yeah.
So, Dan's story had with it, coincidentally for me personally, a lot of connected dots from
Yes.
stuff I've been studying from the past.
Right.
So that to me, and the legitimacy and the people involved, which gave it credibility, gave his story credibility. So
Yeah.
that's why I arrive at that he's a persuasive case personally. But I also aware like I can put this website together that I have, let people read it.
Which is amazing.
Oh, thank you. I have more to come, but that I'm perfectly aware that some people will be able to sift through with some of that stuff and see stuff to cut it down. And others will come through and see stuff that correlates to other things they're studying.
Right.
That will give it some legitimacy. That's just what we all have to deal with in this.
Yeah.
There's no you can use the scientific method. That's one thing that I know Bill Hamilton tried to use when he was doing his investigation to test, make sure you can retest, make sure it can be correlated through different data.
And he expressed some frustrations too there towards the end, though, didn't he? Like about
Well, he was one that's like you're talking about with Jerry. Bill Hamilton dropped out. My phone call with Dan, he told me the last time he talked to Bill Hamilton, they met in a McDonald's in Las Vegas, and Bill Hamilton was shaking. And this was when Dan was being considered a complete fraud. And Bill Hamilton had expended so much investigative time and sat with Dan, and Dan told me, he said, Bill was shaking. And he said, Bill said, they're ruining you. They're ruining you. And after that, Bill dropped out of ufology and he passed away in 2014.
yeah.
And I was like, yeah. And I think there's still something on the web which shows Bill Hamilton's final note to ufology.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, some people are drawn, and this is where it gets very personal. Everybody has the threshold of how much they
Right.
take before they go, no, this is bullshit. I'm out of it. You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, everybody has their different trajectory in and out of this subject. I'm still in it.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, like, what is your heart and your soul telling you where this is all headed? Like, where do you think this is all? Because it feels like we're building up to something. But again,
Yeah,
like you said, we get this date get pushed out, but
not even that.
yeah, exactly. Going beyond the 2027 thing, like it feels like we're building towards something.
Yeah, I will be honest. Since 2017, the subject lost a very, very important factor, and that is stigma. Everything pre-2017, the subject was not supposed to be talked about at all. It is absolutely the thing of tabloids. You're a complete nut job.
Right.
17 and a few years thereafter, that stigma kind of got lost. And it's not completely gone, people would argue, but I got to tell you, for those people who are into it because of 2017 until now, you have no idea what the 90s and the early 2000s was like. You could not talk about this stuff.
I
now
can
we have
imagine.
congressional members talking about it on camera.
Which is
So
fascinating.
things are changing rapidly right now. I will not deny that, and that is something that is definitely happening. I don't know to what end. I don't know if it will eventually lead to throwing a bone to ufology into the world, like this is a serious subject, but that's something will cause it to neutralize and we won't get any further. because I certainly don't want it out.
I cannot tell you how appreciative I am for you coming on. And you're always welcome back. BurischArchive.com. Make sure you hit it up. It is the greatest source for Dan Burisch information out there available. And we got the man right here, Brian Jackson. Hopefully he'll come back someday. Brian, thank you so much.
Thank you. And as Lozana would say, it's been a privilege and an honor.
I love it. All right, buddy. You have a great rest of your work day, and we'll stay in touch for sure.
All right. Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you, Brian. I'll see you, buddy.